Okay, here is a very late top 10 from me, and that is my top 10 worst movies of 2023. This is a list of movies that I not only consider to be big disappointments, but just very, very bad films. That doesn't mean everyone is going to agree with this list, just like my top 10 favourite movies. You know, there's going to be movies in this list that people loved or just really enjoyed a hell of a lot more than I did. This is just my own, very own personal list of what I consider to be very bad movies, but just also, you know, a couple of them being very big disappointments. So yeah, if you agree or disagree with any of my choices within this list, then please let me know in the comments below and let's get a discussion going. And with all that being said, let's start off this list with one of those disappointments. And in at number 10 is a movie that I don't think is unwatchable, but it is a very bad movie, and it was a very disappointing film as well, because it's one of those movies where I just really wanted to have a load of fun and turn my brain off for a couple of hours, and that's Cocaine Bear. This movie fails to deliver on its premise. It falls into that sort of same camp of films like Lake Placid and Snakes on a Plane, but it just sort of really kind of fails to deliver on how crazy and bonkers this film could have been. It does start off promising with this energy and momentum, but that energy and momentum just fizzles out during the second act, and the film completely falls on its arse within the third act. It just ends up becoming quite a dull experience it just ended up being a slog for me to sit through. The highlight within this film, the one moment that really stood out, and the film just sort of goes downhill straight after, is the ambulance scene with the bear chasing that ambulance. And that was a crazy scene, but you just don't get an awful lot of that craziness and that bonkers, I felt. It wasn't really consistent, and as an overall experience, I just found it to be quite dull and very, very disappointing. So yeah, Cocaine Bear is in at number 10 for me. And in at number 9 for me is The Equalizer 3, a movie where I felt like it had lost touch or just disconnected itself from what we were originally introduced to with these characters and this world with the very first Equalizer movie within this franchise. I feel like this third movie it didn't feel like we were within the same world. It didn't for me anyway, personally, and I just found the entire experience to be very dull and drab. I just couldn't buy into where this character that Denzel Washington was playing, where this character had ended up, and sort of his journey through this film. It just didn't feel natural for me, and it just didn't feel like the character that we were introduced to with that first movie. Denzel Washington is great here in The Equalizer 3. He is the highlight of this movie, and again, like Cocaine Bear, it's not unwatchable. It's a bad movie, but I wouldn't say it was absolutely terrible, and it has got its fans, but for me it was a very big disappointment, and the overall experience I found to be quite dull, and like I said, just a slog to sit through and just very disappointing, because for me personally, The Equalizer 3 felt very disconnected from what it was they'd created with that first movie, which I quite liked. So yeah, The Equalizer 3 is in at number 9 for me. And in at number 8 for me is Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. This was a terrible movie, and it was a very big disappointment because I'm a big fan of that first Aquaman movie, also directed by James Wan. There are glimmers of a good movie here somewhere, and there are aspects of this film that I really like, that I appreciated. For example, the direction from James Wan when it comes to certain moments and certain action set pieces, and just sort of the world and how the world was created, the aesthetic of the world, I really liked. But just as an experience overall, it was just a mess. And it was just, like, don't get me wrong, I like a bit of cheese, but it was way too cheesy, and Momoa in this movie was incredibly annoying. I just hated what Momoa did with the character in this movie. It's not the same character that he brought to life with Justice League and the very first Aquaman film. He just goes way over the top. with his performance, and I just found him incredibly annoying. And this film, like another movie in this list, just ends up feeling like a product that the studio wants us to just consume over and over and over again. Like the studio knows that this is the last entry within the DCEU, and they just hope that we go out in our masses to consume this product, and that's how unfortunately it feels. So yeah, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom is in at number 8 for me. In at number 7 for me is Five Nights at Freddy's. Now this is a film that, again, like Cocaine Bear, I felt really fails to deliver on its premise. Now I've never played the video games in which it's based on, and maybe that plays a part into sort of how I felt towards this movie. But I just felt like this entire experience, when it comes to tone, was very disjointed. Like you've kind of got this kind of darker aspect to the story when it comes to our main character, but then you've also got that more absurd, zany, bonkers aspect to the story, and sort of those two tones really just didn't meld well together for me. And as a result, this film just ended up, it just ended up being a very dull experience for me. It was another slog to sit through. It doesn't deliver when it comes to the horror. In fact, it felt very restrained when it comes to the horror aspects of this movie. And so yeah, this was, I was hoping this would be another one of those movies where I could just turn my brain off for 2 hours, be immersed, be entertained, and just have a bit of fun. But it fails at that. So yeah, Five Nights at Freddy's is in at number 7 for me. In at number 6 for me is what I would consider to be one of the weakest entries within the MCU, and that's The Marvels. This film, like Aquaman, felt like a product where the studio just wanted us to consume. It does have this very kind of high energy sort of behind sort of the way in which the narrative is structured, so you would think you'd be entertained for the most part, but for me it felt so artificial in how they created this energy within the narrative. It just kind of really sort of threw me out. It just didn't feel right, and the writing within this film is terrible. Brie Larson looks like she's bored and she just doesn't care. CGI is very inconsistent in quality. At times it looks very photoshopped, and it also has what I felt is one of the weakest villains within the MCU. For me, this film was terrible. It lacks soul. It lacks anything to sort of get you kind of engaged or immersed within the story and the characters' journeys. It just did nothing to really kind of suck me in. It just felt like this kind of product where the studio was panicking because they needed money and they just needed us to consume. That's just how The Marvels felt to me, unfortunately, and that's why it's in at number 6 for me. And in at number 5 for me is Fast 10. Another franchise that's completely lost touch with what these movies originally were, or the audience that these movies were originally aimed for. Don't get me wrong, I like bonkers, over the top, wild fun, and that's what this film is. But I couldn't give a shit for any of the characters and their journeys and what it is they needed to do. And a lot of that is down to the fact that this is another movie that's tonally disjointed. It's like they didn't really know what type of movie it was they wanted to make. You've got terrible writing, and yeah, it's just full of sort of nonsensical moments that just were like, I should be entertained, but because I couldn't give a shit about any of these characters, I just couldn't get immersed. Like, it's got its moments, I suppose. But yeah, didn't do an awful lot for me, and so yeah, that is why Fast 10 is in at number 5 for me. In at number 4 is The Expendables 4. A franchise, a film that wants to celebrate 80s, 90s cheesy action movies, and I'm all in for that. These are the type of movies that I grew up watching and loving, that sort of helped fuel my love for film. Unfortunately, this film felt more like a parody than a love letter to those movies that it clearly wanted to celebrate. It just ended up feeling more like a parody. And again, like a lot of the other movies on this list, it just ends up feeling like a very dull, soulless and drab experience where you've got characters that you don't really care about. The writing is terrible, and even the action within this movie I found to be quite dull and clunky and just uninspired. The Expendables 4 fails to deliver anything compelling and just really lacks the magic of those movies that it is attempting to celebrate. So yeah, The Expendables 4 is in at number 4 for me. In at number 3 for me is Strays, another movie that just really fails to deliver on its premise. You know, you would expect something to be very, you would expect this type of movie with talking animals, it's R-rated, you would expect it to be fun, you would expect it to be entertaining, where you could just turn your brain off for 2 hours and just don't take things too seriously. But this movie seriously struggled to evolve past the same repetitive crude jokes and humour, which at first was funny within the first act, but when you get the same repetitive jokes and humour within the second and third act, it just ends up becoming a very dull and boring experience. There is an attempt at creating a very sort of heartfelt story sort of among this very crude humour, and they fail at sort of delivering on that. They fail at creating that. It's there, you can sort of see it, and you could see what this movie could have been. There's a lot, I remember with Strays, there was a lot of what it could have been. But it's almost like they just kind of run out of ideas in sort of how to create an R-rated film, a comedy with talking animals. And it felt like they sort of really struggled to sort of move past the first page when writing this story and the dialogue and all of that. That's how it felt. So yeah, Strays is in at number 3 for me. In at number 2 for me is Magic Mike's The Last Dance. This experience was very painful to watch. It does sort of peak within the third act, but that also, the third act of this movie also highlights this film's biggest problems. And that the film really should have focused, the story should have focused more on what occurs within the third act when it comes to this theatre show that they're putting together. And I was somewhat entertained, but it's the build-up to that point with these characters that was just so incredibly painful. Not even Channing Tatum dancing all sexy like on a pole could save me from this very dull, boring, soulless experience that lacked any compelling characters, and I was not a fan on how these characters were written. It does explore themes around sort of wealth versus the poor, and I was kind of intrigued by that, but sort of really fails at kind of exploring those themes in a way that sort of sat right with me. And so yeah, this was a very painful experience where I think if the narrative had focused on certain elements more, this could have been perhaps a slightly more entertaining movie. But as a whole, it was just very painful to sit through. It was one of the hardest experiences to sit through last year. And sorry, Channing Tatum, but it doesn't matter how sexy you can work those poles, it couldn't save me from this experience. That is Magic Mike's Last Dance, and it's in at number 2 for me. So we finally reached number 1. And what you've probably noticed with a lot of these movies that I've chosen as my top 10 worst movies of 2023 is they've got a lot of things in common. And one of those is they all failed to deliver on their premise. And yeah, Meg 2. Like, what the fuck was that? Like, we don't get any sharks until about halfway through. It's another movie that's tonally confused, like it doesn't really know what it wants to be. And, when you watch the trailer to the Meg 2, again, it's another one of those films where you think, I can just turn my brain off, have a bit of fun, be entertained, don't take things too seriously. You know, you've got another one of those movies that kind of falls into that very kind of Lake Placid or Deep Blue Sea or Snakes on a Plane, those types of movies. And unfortunately, it just really failed to deliver anything that was fun, entertaining, compelling. Like, the trailer kind of shows all the best bits, but the Meg 2 for me last year was one of the most dullest, boring experiences I've had in the cinema. I just couldn't believe that. I was so surprised, because when you've got a film that's starring Jason Statham, which, by the way, he's the best aspect, he's the best part of this movie, going up against these giant sharks and giant squids and all of that, you'd expect it to be fun, you'd expect it to be entertaining. Yes, it's going to be over the top, but you know what, just go with it. But fuck, they fail at it massively, and I just can't get over how they managed that. But there we go, you know, Meg 2 was, for me personally, the worst movie last year of 2023. So yeah, a little bit late, but here they are, my top 10 worst movies of 2023. I have done full reviews for every movie mentioned in this list, so please feel free to check those out on the channel. And if you agree or disagree with any of my choices, then please let me know below and let's get a discussion going. And if you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And if you want to watch future reviews and just general talk from some random Welsh geek ramble on, then please hit the subscribe button. It will mean an awful lot. I have got a couple of reviews planned. One of those for Spaceman, which was released on Netflix last weekend. And you've also got Imaginary, which is coming out in cinemas. It's the latest horror to come from Blumhouse this weekend. And I'm looking forward to checking that out. I'm very intrigued by Imaginary. So yeah, a couple of reviews planned. But again, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I'll be catching you guys soon.